Well, good morning. This month we've been doing a series on sort of the essence of who we are spiritually. We did a talk on spiritual truth, last week on spiritual love, and this week on spiritual identity. And the idea is to really visit that essential idea of who and what we are, to get beneath the surface of life, where we spend put a lot of our attention. In fact, most of our attention normally goes in to what's going on around us, how the world is responding or not responding to us, how we feel about things, our everyday life, which is going to be what we're going to be doing, but it's important from time to time to go within and see something deeper. We used this image from the Sistine Chapel a couple of weeks ago to show the connection between what we would call spirit and human beings, that we are unfolding out of spirit. Although sometimes it doesn't seem that way. This morning I got up and I normally have a morning routine. You're feeding the cats and making coffee and feeding the fish and things like that. Occasionally, if I'm sleepy, I feed the fish to the cats now. But I got up. I also had some laundry to start and things like that. So I went downstairs and first things first, I filled a coffee pot with water and get the beans out and put them in and get the coffee going. Then I went in and started the laundry, and I came back and fed the indoor fish, and then I fed the outdoor fish and fed the cats, and then I went outside and actually Duran had brought the newspaper in, so I picked up the newspaper from the front door and brought in. I looked over and the coffee pot was full. And usually I get to the coffee when it's about up to 2, and it was all the way up to 10. And I thought, that's interesting. I started to pour it, and I looked, and it was really, you could see through it. Now, when I make coffee, usually you can put your spoon in and it stands right up. I like it fairly strong. And I looked, what's wrong? And I opened up the top, and there were the beans. I just had forgotten to put them in the grinder. So I'd actually made tea, if you think about it. And I got to thinking, I didn't even know that I didn't do that all the way up to the point where I looked inside the basket, and there were the beans. So what happened? Well, I got distracted. My routine was broken. It was expanded. I was thinking about other things, and that's really what we do a lot of the time, right? You ever make a mistake? Anyone ever make a mistake in here? Like that or bigger, It's lucky I wasn't working at a nuclear plant today. So we live often in the distractions. We live in that place of getting through the day, thinking of the routine, what's right in front of me to do, or we're not what's right in front of me. We're thinking about an argument we had 2 weeks ago with somebody, or we're thinking ahead to something we're going to be doing later, and we're either looking forward to it or we're worried about it. And meanwhile, you're trying to do other things. And we live so often and so much in this place of distraction. Dr. Holmes says, to get to the basics, there is but one subjective mind, and what we call our subjective mind, notice the capital and the small s, is really the use we are making of the one law. Each individual maintains his identity in law through his personal use of it, and each is drawing from life what he thinks into it. So if we step back and we sort of get this concept, this is an important concept. It's probably one of the most important metaphysical concepts there is, that there's one mind. One mind. The title of the book that Dr. Holmes wrote is called The Science of Mind. But it's really not the science of small m mind, although that's part of it. It's more the science of capital M mind, the one mind. That we live, move, and have our being, all of us and all of creation, in one thing. So, again, the metaphor or the allegory I often use is the fingers on your hand. They're each unique and different, yet they're part of your hand. And if they forget that they're part of your hand, or if you chop one off, it doesn't even know it's a finger. It would just lay there. Right? Don't try this at home. And those of you looking in on TV, don't try this at home. Right? But the intelligence that allows my finger to act like a finger or my thumb to act like a thumb is in the whole of me. And you might say the intelligence that allows creation to unfold is in the whole of that creative intelligence of the universe. And my mind and your mind are part of the one mind, and we are not individual, we are individualized. A severed finger is individual. A connected finger is individualized. See the difference? So if we became disconnected from source, we would cease to function. Wouldn't work. Because the very, like we did in that little guided imagery session, what animates you, what gives you life is somehow this spiritual energy flowing into you that somehow is transformed into physical energy. Nobody knows how. We still don't really know what animates a person. What's the difference between when you're alive and when you're dead? Where is the switch that's turned off? We don't know. So what we tend to think of is we're all independent beings walking around. We have, the life force is somehow built into our biology, and when our biology stops working, the life force is snuffed out. That's the rational scientific worldview currently. The rational scientific worldview does change over time, by the way. But that's currently the belief. There are those in what's called scientism, which is sort of looking at science as a religion, saying you have to believe what science says, even though it's going to change with the next study or the next experiment. But that your awareness, as we would say, your consciousness, both conscious and subconscious, is an epiphenomenon of your biological structure. That you could not think except that your brain somehow creates thought. Okay. Now, there's a lot of reasons that seems appealing, because it does make sense. If you cut off my head, I stop thinking, at least in a second or two, after I'm wondering what's just happened. But on the other hand, it also seems to make sense that consciousness comes first and uses materiality as a vehicle for expression. And there's another allegory I'll share with you. In your car, you probably have a radio. Okay, now in the old days, they had push buttons for the stations. Now, you still kind of do in some cases, although everything's digital. But you're tuned into a specific frequency in your car radio. Maybe it's country and western, or NPR, or classic rock, or whatever it would be. And you would think, just from that experience, that that's the only station that exists, the one that's coming through the radio. Yet if you push another button or turn the dial, you leave that frequency and come up with another one. Now, the frequency you just left didn't go away. It's still there. It's in the car, in fact. It's all around you. And the radio has a receiver in it that pulls the signal out of the air along a certain frequency range, and you can tune into the right frequency and you get the fidelity of the broadcast. But all of the broadcasts are out there at the same time. If you look at yourself as a radio and your brain as the receiver, there's also a way of looking at reality that says we are tuning into an infinite consciousness and we receive the frequency that we are able to tune into. That would explain why you don't act like my cat. My cat has a cat brain receiver tuned into the frequencies of catdom. If you were to tune into them, you would be considered odd. We won't go into the specifics about that. So, what is our connection to this whole, and is it important that we even understand it, or can we just go through life facing situations as they show up and reacting to them? And the answer is yes, you can. People have done that for millennia. But it seems like we're increasingly developing the capacity to realize the true nature of our being. that was not available to us before for a variety of reasons. So we sit on this planet and we look out into that infinite sky. Many of you went out and looked at the moon last night, the harvest moon, and it's the beauty of that. You say, what's my connection to all that? Well, the metaphysical teachings would say it's all part of one thing. But I don't get to experience the infinity of the one thing, just like my finger doesn't get to experience the totality of what it is to be me. My finger doesn't know what it's like to be a toe, or an ear, or a kidney. So our basic identity, just like the basic identity of all that is me and all that is you, physically, mentally, emotionally, all the dimensions that we are, there is a basic core identity that we would describe it in words that say is connected to the infinite mind or the infinite spirit or the infinite creative intelligence of the universe and is one with it, but can only draw out of that infinite intelligence and infinite potential that which we can tune into. You know, we look at things like memory. Everybody has memories, right? Well, where are your memories? I've attended a couple of autopsies when I was a police officer. You know, I don't recommend this, but this is just for illustration purposes here. And I, one time, asked the ME, the medical examiner, can you show me where the memories are? And he was holding a brain in his hand. Actually, she was holding a brain in her hand. And she said, I guess they're in there somewhere, although they're probably not there anymore since the person's dead. And that made me wonder, you know, if memories were something real, we should be able to find them somewhere within the cellular structure of the brain or wherever. Maybe there's a little organ, like maybe that's what the appendix is. It's a memory file cabinet. We don't know. But it doesn't seem that memories have a physical component. They've never found memories in an autopsy. So maybe what is going on is the memories are out there somewhere as frequencies that when you tune in to the memories, you can remember them, but we don't remember them perfectly either, do we? Because maybe our tuner gets out of whack. You know, if you're my age, you remember back in the day when you're driving around at night trying to find an AM radio station. And there would be all kinds of sounds and static and everything, and occasionally you'd hit it just right. But the push button never quite got it just right all the time. You'd have to adjust the handle a little, the knob a little bit to get it perfect. Then you'd drive a mile and it would be off again. Well, maybe that's kind of how our brains work. That's why our memories tend to be a little skewed when they come up. You know, we remember selectively, we add to them, we subtract from them. That would be much easier, more easily explained if it was a tuner issue, a receiver issue, rather than that the memories were somehow changing. So if I'm a receiver walking around and my brain somehow tunes into the universal creative whatever, let's call it mind, to keep our language simple, I can pull out of that mind what I tune into, yet there's much more there. Ernest Holmes says in the textbook, spirit can only do to you what it can do through you. So if I get a car radio that doesn't include the top end of the FM dial, the stations up there, say from 105 to 107.9, I can't get those in, even though they're still there. How would I limit my frequency as a human being? Well, maybe I'd get some beliefs that are very limiting in what I'll allow in. You know? Like somebody else's point of view. 'Tis the season for that, right? By the way, Wednesday night is how to heal a stressful life. So you can watch the first 45 minutes of the presidential debate and then come in here and get healed. Just saying. Dr. Holmes in the book Love and Law says humans are an identity of volition and choice in God infinite. There is no such thing as your mind and my mind. There is just mind with a capital M in this infinite circle, this limitless circle without circumference. It's hard to describe an infinite. An infinite just goes on, never ends. But we are an identity of volition and choice. In other words, that we have within us some degree of intelligence that allows us to choose. William James, one of the founders of Western psychology, said every idea, every thought has within it an ideomotor action. In other words, when you think, there's an intelligence contained within the thought. It's like the seed going into the ground. The seed going into the ground determines what the plant will be, not the ground, not the rain, not the farmer, the seed. So the seeds I plant within the fertile ground of my subconscious mind are my ideas and my thoughts. The intelligence contained in my thoughts will therefore be reflected in what shows up as my life. Cause and effect. Very simple idea. The problem is we don't necessarily see it that way because we don't see what's going on in the middle piece, which is what's going on subconsciously. You have the thought, you know what you're thinking. Well, not always, but when you're paying attention, when you put the coffee in the grinder, right? I was on autopilot, so I didn't know what I was thinking. My conscious thoughts are available to me, but I was somewhere else. I was having a different conscious thought. I don't know how that works. But we have access to our thoughts. We know that. We have access to the effect of our thoughts. We have access to what shows up in our life and the way it shows up, right? You perceive it through your senses. You feel it within your being. But in the middle, the subconscious part is not accessible to us because it's subconscious. Hans Selye, another great founder of American psychology, called it unconscious. He said they call the unconscious because it's unconscious. Which means I don't have access to my unconscious or my subconscious. I don't have direct access to it. I can only see the effect of it. And I've talked about this before, the black box idea, which is used in science sometimes. You have a black box that you can't see what happens inside, but you put something in and you get something out, and you can figure out the relationship between what you put in and what you get out. Well, your subconscious mind is like a black box, and if you pay attention to the quality of thinking, the quality of thoughts and feelings that go into it, you will see a relationship to what shows up at the other side. But you have to pay attention over a period of time. Well, I did an affirmation 3 days ago, and my life still sucks. What happened? Well, what happened in the rest of the 3 days? What did you do after you did the affirmation? Well, I thought about how my life sucked. For about 12 hours, then I, had a beer and went to bed. Go figure. Okay, so become cognizant of the 12 hours you thought about your life sucking and realize that went into the black box too. Now, which had more power? That one affirmation you did, even if you did a really good one, or the 12 hours of, oh God, my life, oh. Right? So if you could hire somebody to follow you around and read your thoughts. Now, you can't do this, obviously. But if you could, and they would write them all down, and there'd be like a color coding for your emotions in the moment, from purple to really negative to like bright and sunny, right? And they would hand you a report at the end of the day. Here's the quality, here's the specific thoughts, here's the emotional state, and here's the average. What would that look like in your typical day? And remember, we tend to over-report positives. So what Holmes was saying is, this is a science. He called it mental science. Called it religious science, ultimately. But mental science is the idea that your mind works scientifically. It interacts with a realm of potentiality that also works scientifically, but we don't have a full understanding of. But we don't need to. You don't need to know how something works before you can use it. right? How many of you know exactly what happens between the time you turn your key in the car and the time the engine starts? Stuff happens under the hood. I don't know. I listen to car talk, but I only get incomplete, explanations there. I just assume it's magic. That there are these magicians that are called electrical engineers and automotive engineers, and they put this thing together, and it shows up in my driveway, and I turn the key, and damn it, it better start. And if it doesn't, I have to call an expert to help me figure out why it doesn't start. There are people that know how to do that, but most of us don't. Yet you don't think anything of getting in the car and turning the key, having no idea what's going on. Because why? You know the input is turn the key, the output is car starts. And you get to go where you want to go. You're not too concerned with what's going on in the middle. Right? How many of you have an appliance or something that has a little data chip in it? Maybe a refrigerator that has some kind of digital thing, or a washing machine, or how many of you have a car with a navigation? Or how many have a smartphone? Well, in order to know how any of that stuff works, you have to know quantum physics. Because they use quantum measurements and quantum ideas to make those things work. And you know what? Almost nobody knows anything about quantum physics. And yet it doesn't stop me from pulling out my iPhone and turning on the GPS. I have an old iPhone, so the map works. Little current events in there. Right? And I don't have to know how do they do that? You know, I speak the name of a restaurant somewhere on the planet, and it comes up with where it is and a route how to get there. How do they do that? Well, I don't need to know how they do that. Yet not knowing how they do that doesn't keep me from using the GPS, does it? So, not knowing how my subconscious works shouldn't keep me from using my knowledge of the law of mind to the best effect possible. Which means I want to make sure the input is really good input so that I get really good output. And how do I tell if it's really good input? I pay attention to the output. You know, if you ever start your car after it was started? You know, already did that, right? You know, well, that's bad input. And if you keep doing that, you'll get bad output. The teeth on your starter motor will break, and it won't work. I do have some idea what happens under the hood. You see? So if I put in, as they say in the recovery movement, if I put in stinking thinking, I get out a stinking life. And then what do? I look at it and say, God, this life stinks. And that's another input. I can't not input. See, you can't turn the key in your car and not have it do something. Oh, I didn't mean that. You know, well, still happened. I didn't mean to think all that crap today. Still did it. I didn't mean to tell myself that I was awful and terrible and nobody loved me, but I still did it. And therefore, there will be an output that will be equivalent to that. So why do I do all this? Why do I get so distracted? I don't focus on my spiritual identity. I don't focus on my spiritual identity. If there's any part of my life about which I feel negative, fearful, upset, or angry, I have bought into a lie. If there's anyone that I'm upset, fearful, or angry about, I have bought into a lie. See, the feedback system is very good. It just is. But the problem is we misunderstand it. You go around acting like a victim, you can find lots of people say, oh, it's not your fault, honey. I'd feel the same way. Which does you no good whatsoever. Does you no good. Does you stay in victim, right? Anybody ever been in victim? Wonderful, isn't it? You feel so self-righteous. But you're miserable. Why me? Why me, Lord? Law. Why me, law? And the law says input, output. The law can do nothing but say yes to what you put into the system and mirror it back to you. Just like your car, when I turn the key, it doesn't make coffee. Not part of the deal. The key turns on the engine. It doesn't make coffee. Just like my crappy thoughts won't create a good life. My desperate thoughts won't create comfort. My victim thoughts won't give me mastery. Because the input and the output match. So if I don't like the results I'm getting, I've got to come back and look at what am I putting into the system? What is my creative thinking doing? And is it and you know what? When you're in those negative thoughts, you know it isn't good for you. It's like when you're sitting at the drive-through line at McDonald's. You know you're making a mistake. And you know you're going to get the fries and not the fruit by the time you get up to the window, but you're having the conversation in your head, oh no, I'm going to get the apples, I'm going to get the apples, I'm going to get the apples, large fry. Extra sauce on that Big Mac. And a 700-ounce soda. We need bigger cup holders. You know, when you're sitting in the line, you know there's a part of you, that wisdom part inside saying, you're not doing good, what's good for you. You know it. But we usually can push that voice aside and do what we feel like doing in the moment, which is often driven by feeling not good. So we do something to take away the feeling of not good that is even worse for us. And we do it all the time, many of us. Because we don't think from our spiritual identity. We think from a false idea of separation. Do something, come on. Okay. This is a long quote. This is just one part of it. We'll do part at a time. If you wish to be successful, you must identify yourself with success. Not just think about success, identify yourself with success. Own it. The law of identity is a definite thing. That which you mentally identify yourself sets up an image of thought in your consciousness which tends to attract the situation with which you are mentally identified. This happens all the time. I was watching a football game last night, Louisiana State University against Towson University. Now, I grew up right near Towson University, which back in the day was a teacher's college. And for some reason, they started playing football. It's still a pretty small school. And the fact that they were playing LSU, last year's national champion, number 3 in the country this year, in Baton Rouge, you figure, why are they even televising this thing? It's going to be such a blowout, right? Well, in the third quarter, Towson State was trailing by 3 points. And you go, wow. And I'm sure Towson State was going, what the hell? And I'm sure Louisiana State was going, what the hell? This shouldn't be happening. And you know what happened? Both reverted to their original consciousness. They both went where they identify themselves. That's why they call it an upset. It hardly ever happens. When you know you're supposed to win, you win. Most of the time, if not all the time. When you know you're supposed to lose, you find a way to lose, to get back into sanity. That which I mentally identify myself as sets up an image of thought in my consciousness which tends to attract the situations with which I am mentally identified. If I see myself as a victim, I will go on the lookout and put out my radar and sonar for victimizers, and I will draw them in, right and left. And my identity will be affirmed, affirmed, affirmed every day until I change my thinking. On the other hand, if I identify myself with my true spiritual identity and my power, and realize the goodness and power and intelligence that I am, that will be affirmed, affirmed, affirmed every day, because I will draw in people that will mirror that back to me. Might be the same people. I will just have a different experience of them. So the quote goes on. The subjective or subconscious state of your consciousness, which means the sum total of your unconscious thought processes, is continually attracting or repelling. This process goes on beneath the threshold of the conscious mind. Did you ever do something you didn't know why you did it? Because it was subconscious. Why didn't I put the beans in the grinder? Why did I put them right into the filter? Because I wasn't paying attention, but my autopilot took over and it got it wrong for some reason. Well, the grinder and the basket are shaped about the same. It wasn't that big a stretch. You know, why didn't autopilot do it right? Because I guess usually I'm paying more attention. What's going on here? I am attracting to me who I see myself to be all the time. Now, the interesting thing was, I was surprised when that happened. I didn't say, oh, there I go again, which means it was outside of my norm. Now, when something bad happens to you, something you would describe as bad, are you surprised or you go, oh, there it goes. I knew this was coming. Holy crap. I've been worrying about this for quite a few weeks. I've been picturing it just like this. I was picturing it just like this. Worst case scenario. And it happened. How is that possible? That's like turning the key to the car and go, the engine started. How is that possible? Because that's the way we are designed. I remember who and what I am. I remember oneness. I remember. You already are what you are. But we forget. Why? Because we're told different. From the time we show up in the planet, for the most part, we're told different. You're an index finger told you're not part of the hand. That you're on your own, buddy. It's a tough world out there. Nobody's going to do anything for you. You got to toughen up, and you better get out there and fight your way to success. Lies. Because when you fight your way to success, you don't enjoy the success. Because you're waiting for the next fight. We all know that at some level. So what's the problem? It's input, output. Your output matches your input. If you don't like your output, change your input. How do I do that? Think differently. Think about what you want instead of what you don't want. That's one step. Think about who you really are instead of who you're afraid you are. What if it were true from the day you were conceived that you are a genius, that you are beautiful, that you are love expressed, and that anyone who saw you differently was not seeing the truth, they were seeing a reflection of their own misunderstanding of who they are. So it's not their fault either. And anyone that you have seen as less than, it's not because they're less than, it's because you were seeing from a false identity of your own. You know, if we can clear this up, the whole world gets healed. That simple. I mean it. The whole world gets healed. How's it start? It starts with one person saying, I am love and I refuse to see anything else in myself or anyone else. Let's try that. Repeat after me. I am love, and I refuse to see anything less in myself or anyone else. Every time you're feeling like victim, say that 15 times with feeling. Your life will transform. Somebody asked me the other day, what's the hardest thing about being a minister? I said, telling people they're magnificent. Because you get this look, you get this glazed over look as they reflect on all the times they believe they weren't. Yeah. And then I have to realize I'm only seeing that glazed over look because I've got it too. You see, I'm not exempt just because I got a certificate. But I will say this, I continually work to recognize the truth of myself and to live it. Best I can. And I count on all you to let me know when I'm not doing it. You do. So my identity, your identity is the same identity. We are unique expressions of the one, yet we are all unique in that we are all part of the same thing. Like all the fingers on your hand are different, but it's your hand. There is no difference in the potential of any of us to express fully in this life. No one was marked for failure at birth or before. We all, and every minute you exist in a field of pure potential. Just like your car radio, every frequency's in there, man. You just got to decide what you're going to tune into. You're going to tune into something that's loving and joyful and powerful, or you're going to tune into some poor me cowboy song. It's up to you. It's up to you. Thank you. And namaste.